What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from UFC London. We're going to be taking a deep dive into each of these matchups from a betting perspective, and hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And of course, home advantage is going to have a pretty big impact on all of the fights this weekend that feature a fighter from the UK, which is quite a lot of them. If we take a look at this weekend's card, we can see that a fighter from the UK is in the vast majority of these matchups, and we know how big of an impact home advantage can have when it comes to judging and the outcome of fights. So rather than repeat myself and go through how home advantage is likely to impact each of these matchups, I thought I would talk a bit about it now so that I don't end up having to talk about it in every single fight, repeat myself, make this video really long. And of course, because this event is taking place in London, it's being broadcast at a time where it's very easy for fans of the UFC in Europe to watch it live. Usually, for those of us in Europe, it's very difficult to watch UFC events live because the majority of UFC events are broadcast during the night. So if you're a fan from Europe that is looking forward to watching these fights live, and you'd like to experience live betting with me this weekend at UFC London, I'm going to be giving away free trials to anyone that wants to join live betting for this UFC London card. All you need to do is email me below. I'll leave my email address in the description below. And yeah, get a free trial, experience what it's like, and maybe get to bet the UFC and watch the UFC in a way that you've never really thought about before, because yeah, we do things pretty differently, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you're wondering why you'd want to live bet with me, well, if we take a look at our results and we scroll down to the live betting results, you can see a very nice looking profitability chart where for the last 8 years we've just consistently made profits, and we've made profits almost every month in that time. So if you'd like to live bet with me this weekend for UFC London, you live in Europe or anywhere else for that matter, if you just want to give it a try, email me below. We'll get you set up with a free trial. So now that I don't end up repeating myself on talking about home advantage on every single fight, we'll talk about it here. So the actual statistic, the actual statistical impact that home advantage has on events that take place in the UK is that the fighter from the UK wins around 67% of the time when they're facing people from outside the UK. So obviously some of that is going to be down to favourable matchmaking. You know, obviously whenever the UFC do an event, you know, in a country outside the United States, they like to pack it full of fighters from that country because the hometown fans want to see their own fighters fight and they want to see them win. So because of that, you know, UFC, you know, mixed martial arts is a sport, but it's also an entertainment business. They're going to want to toss some favourable matchups in there so that the hometown guys can get, you know, hopefully some wins to please the guys that are paying all that money for tickets to go see the UFC live, right? So you'll get matchups like Molly McCann, Julius Stoliarenko, which very much favour Molly McCann. So favourable matchmaking does have a part to play in that statistic, but it's not the whole story, and there are obviously other advantages or other ways in which hometown advantage influences fights. The first being the psychological impact that it has on the hometown fighter and kind of like the away team fighter, right? Because if you think about it, say you're a fighter from the UK competing, you know, on this card this weekend. Yes, there may be some added pressure to fighting in front of your hometown fans. You got to carry the weight of their expectations, but at the same time, it can be hugely motivating to have a whole arena behind you supporting you. I always use the analogy of personal trainers, right? Why do most people hire personal trainers when they could just, you know, learn how to do workouts and exercises online, or they could just work out by themselves, right? Why do they need a personal trainer? All the information is available for them online these days on, you know, how to work out effectively. Well, the reason why people hire a personal trainer is two reasons mainly. The first reason is it makes them accountable. So if you just don't feel like working out one day and you're not accountable to anyone, it's easy to just not work out, right? Whereas if you've got an appointment booked in with your personal trainer, you're not going to want to let them down. Sorry, I've gone blurry here. You're not going to want to let them down, and you're less likely to cancel because you don't want to let them down, so you're more likely to do the workout. That's the first reason. The second reason, and of course that does have a small impact on how home advantage positively influences the hometown fighter's chance of winning, because maybe they'll push a little harder, dig a little bit deeper, or maybe even train harder during camp because they don't want to let their fans down, they don't want to let their family down, everyone in the arena that is paying their hard-earned money to watch them. And then the second aspect of why people will hire a personal trainer is obviously the motivational factor, right? We know what it's like when we, hit the treadmill, or we do like a long distance run, and it starts to get really tough, our lungs start to hurt, it becomes difficult to breathe, our legs are aching. If we're just running by ourselves, very easy to stop, go do something else. But when you've got someone motivating you, running with you, shouting at you to keep going, giving you encouragement, it's a lot easier to push through and keep going and push harder than you thought you could. And the hometown crowd can have exactly the same impact on fighters when they're tired, or they're hurt, or they're thinking about quitting. That extra support, that extra energy they get from the crowd can really give them a lift. And of course, Dana White has talked about how passionate and energizing the crowd in London are, and they really will give a big psychological boost to the fighters competing at UFC London this weekend if the crowd are on their side. And remember what George St. Pierre once said, fighting is 90% mental. So to have 20,000 people in an arena supporting you, send you all that positive energy, it can just give you another level. And at the highest level of mixed martial arts, where everything is a game of inches, just taking your performance up that level can be the difference between winning and losing. So that's one of the main reasons why home advantage is so big. Of course, the other reason why home advantage is such a big deal is because of judging. Now, judging isn't necessarily biased towards hometown fighters. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Who knows? But I think one of the main reasons why hometown fighters do get such beneficial treatment on judges' scorecards is because judges are only human, and there's a lot of groupthink, a lot of group mentality. We're all easily influenced, and if you're a judge in an arena full of 20,000 people, and for example, every time Nathaniel Wood throws a punch, the crowd goes crazy and makes it sound like that shot was way more impactful than it actually was. And then when Andre Fili may land a shot of equal impact, it's a giant tumbleweed, no one even reacts to it. It's very difficult as a judge to kind of not be influenced by that. So I'm sure there is, some corruption, some hometown cooking, particularly in MMA where the judging is so bad. But I also think a lot of it is just judges being influenced by that atmosphere in the arena, because if you've ever been to an event in the UK, you'll know it gets lively in there, really, really lively. And it would be difficult not to be influenced by that. And we've seen, obviously, a lot of hometown decisions over the years to favour British fighters in the UK, which will contribute towards that home advantage stat of British fighters winning 67% of the time when they face non-British fighters in the UK. And of course, I say the word UK as opposed to England because back in the day before COVID hit, the UFC obviously did 2 or 3 events in Scotland. So those statistics form a part of that. And the crowd are going to be behind guys like Paul Craig, who's Scottish, even if Chris Duncan, who is Scottish, maybe even Shauna Barron, who's Irish, even though those guys aren't from England. So, I hope you found all that stuff useful, and it kind of applies to every single fight on this card where a British guy is facing a non-British guy. So yes, I hope that you found that useful. So what we're now going to do is break down all of the main card fights on this UFC London card, starting with the main event. So, if you've seen the thumbnail for this breakdown video, we are obviously mentioning or questioning whether Tom Aspinall is all hype. Now, obviously, he's not all hype. He's very good. That's just clickbaity to get more views on this video, right? Obviously, you guys know that. That's the way the game is. That's the way the YouTube game is. Trying to grab people's attention. I don't think Aspinall is all hype. But I do ask that question. I do use it in a title because there are a lot of unanswered questions over Aspinall, which does make it difficult to determine the level that he's at. And it is possible that Aspinall is nowhere near as good as people think he is, because some people think this guy is a potential future champion, a title contender, all this kind of stuff, and he absolutely might be. I'm not saying he isn't. What I am saying is that there's a few deal-breaking unanswered, or a few unanswered questions where if we don't get the right answers to those questions, it's an absolute deal breaker, and we will be discussing them. And obviously the reason why we will focus heavily on Tom Aspinall in this breakdown is because of the odds. He's a massive favourite. So whenever we see fighters in this odds range, we're really trying to work out, you know, what's going on with the odds. Is there any value on Marcin Tybura? Because there's no way that you can bet a heavyweight fighter in this odds range. It's just not smart. You know, they're both big guys. All right, Marcin Tybura doesn't hit the hardest. He doesn't really have one-shot knockout power. But it does only take one shot in MMA at the end of the day to end someone's night. And with Aspinall being such a big favourite, you know, if you look at his odds, if we pop it into an implied probability calculator, 1.21 minus 476 for an implied probability of 83%. I mean, I don't care even if you're Tom Aspinall's dad. There's no way that you can bet him at these odds because there's just no value there. It's virtually impossible to find value on a heavyweight in this odds range because, you know, they're big guys, man. And like I say, it only takes one shot to end the fight. On top of that, with so many unanswered questions with Tom Aspinall that we will be going into, there's just no way that you could bet him in this odds range. So if we look at the odds on Marcin Tybura, he is around an average of 4.50, which is going to be plus 350 for an implied probability of 22%. For me, when we're researching a fight like this, the real question is... Apologies, guys. I'm going to move this so that stops happening. The real question is whether there's going to be value on Marcin Tybura, right? If he's worth a gamble at big underdog odds. So if we take a look at the X factors, we can see that Tybura is 37 years old, 6'3" with a 78-inch reach. And we can see that Tom Aspinall, 30 years old, 6'5" with a 78-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. There is a bit of a difference in age. Now, Tybura hasn't really shown any signs of decline. I mean, he is getting pretty old. He's going to be 38 years old in a few months' time. And even though he hasn't shown any signs of decline, he is at that stage in his career where he could be starting to decline. So even though Aspinall is coming into this fight on the back of a pretty serious knee injury, at 30 years old, he's an absolute baby for a heavyweight. So while there are a lot of unanswered questions over him, you would expect Aspinall to be making big improvements from fight to fight, whereas Tybura is at that stage where you'd expect him to start declining. So both guys are definitely on different career trajectories. Statistically, the younger fighter wins around 65% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight. So already Aspinall has some pretty strong statistics on his side, right? He's got the home advantage stat on his side. He's got the age stat on his side as well. They don't quite justify his implied probability of 83%, but they obviously do contribute to everyone rightfully favouring Aspinall in this fight, which I also, favour Aspinall. But we don't really care who's favoured, right? We're trying to look at this fight from a betting point of view, and the odds are very, very wide here. Even if you do favour Aspinall, at these odds, maybe you can find some reason to take a gamble on Marcin Tybura. So, in terms of how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view, I think we can all agree that Aspinall is going to have a pretty big advantage on the feet. He moves very well. He's very fast for a heavyweight. He's very technical. He throws a nice diverse range of strikes, and he's got true, legit knockout power. Tybura's striking is his biggest weakness. He's very slow. He's very bad defensively. Doesn't move his head very much. And while he is a lot more durable at this stage in his career than he was earlier in his career, partly because he uses, a lot more grappling heavy game plans these days to spend less time on the feet. Tybura is still a bit of a sitting duck to the knockout because of how slow he is. So if Aspinall can keep this fight standing, Tybura is going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble. Now, the question over Tybura being in a lot of trouble standing is certainly true early in this fight, but we don't know how this fight is going to look past round one, because if we look at Tom Aspinall's record, we can see that he's never been to a decision, which is obviously a bit of a concern because this is a 5-round fight. So he doesn't even know how to pace himself over 3 rounds, let alone 5. And we know one of Tybura's biggest strengths is his cardio. He's one of these heavyweights that can go hard for a decent amount of time without slowing down. So this comes back to, talking about unanswered questions with Aspinall, where perhaps he's a cardio machine that can go hard for 10 rounds. Perhaps he's got the best gas tank out of any heavyweight we've ever seen, right? It's possible. But he could also be another Terence McKinney, a bit of a glass cannon, who is very, very dangerous early, but if you could drag him into the second and third round, perhaps he will fade very, very hard. If you look at his record, he's barely been past round 1 in his career. He's been past round 1, 2, 3 times. I mean, this time was only 1 minute into round 2, so barely past round 1. And what's interesting is, on the previous 2 occasions that he went past round 1, he actually lost, which is super interesting to me. So he's never, aside from Andrei Arlovski, who's like 150 years old, he's never won a fight after the first round. And that's very interesting because we know how tough Tybura is. Yes, he's bad defensively, but if he can hang in there, this one might get very interesting, because while we don't know what Tom Aspinall's cardio is like, we do have a few clues to suggest it may not be great. The first clue is that he relies on a lot of footwork and movement, where he's very light on his feet, bounces around a lot, and this is partly what makes him so dangerous, partly what makes him so good, because he doesn't fight like a heavyweight. He fights like a middleweight, right? Very fast, a lot of footwork, a lot of movement. But the reason why you don't see that style in a lot of heavyweights is because it's not easy for big guys to move around as much as Aspinall does without gassing out very, very quickly. Now, obviously Cyril Gane can do it, but he's a bit of a unicorn. Really, Cyril Gane is the only heavyweight that I've ever seen that can move as much as he does, stay as light on his feet, use that kind of footwork, and do it for 25 minutes. I've never seen anyone else be able to do that before. Please leave in the comments below if you can think of anyone else other than Cyril Gane or Tom Aspinall that can move like Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall, because for me, I just can't recall anyone in the heavyweight division being able to do it in recent history without gassing very bad. Maybe Aspinall is another unicorn like Cyril Gane, but if we're working in terms of probabilities, and we know that Cyril Gane is one of the only heavyweights to ever be able to use that much footwork and movement without slowing down, what are the odds on Aspinall coming along in the same generation and being able to do it as well? It depends which way you look at it, right? For me personally, probably not very high, because it's such a rare skill or such a rare quality for a heavyweight to have. To have 2 of them come along at the same time, not that likely. But maybe Aspinall is part of the next generation of heavyweight fighter that can do it. I don't know. The jury's out, but it's something worth bearing in mind. Another piece of another thing to another potential clue that Aspinall may not be particularly good past the first round is his fight against Stuart Austin from all the way back in 2015. Now, of course, we need to just put some context around this. Obviously, this fight was a very long time ago. It was 8 years ago. And back then, Aspinall would have been in his early 20s. You know, his diet wouldn't have been as good as it is now. His training wouldn't have been as good as it is now. I very much doubt he could afford to train full time back then. He was probably working a job. And so, you know, we don't want to judge Aspinall harshly for this fight because he's going to have improved exponentially, right? But ultimately, all we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And this is one of the only pieces of footage that we've got of Tom Aspinall going past round one. So we don't really have a lot else to work with. So when we're trying to gauge, you know, how Aspinall might look if this fight goes past round one, what his cardio might be look like, or what his cardio might look like, this might be this is really the only thing we've got to work with, right? This brings me on to another point. We'll talk about two things simultaneously. We're talking about unanswered questions over Aspinall, okay? We know that Marcin Tybura has evolved in recent years, where he went from being kind of, you know, a slow plodding kickboxer that wasn't particularly effective on the feet, to incorporating more grappling into his style of fighting, and now in most of his fights he uses a grappling heavy game plan. What's very interesting about that is that we don't really know anything about Aspinall's grappling. So if you look at obviously his record, all of his fights have ended very quickly, and they've gone one of two ways. He's either starched guys on the feet, or he's fought guys who were a relatively low level on the ground, and he's been able to catch him in a bad position on the ground and submit him very quickly. Look, I know Arlovsky in his day was a decent grappler, but again, he's in his 40s now, right? Volkov's never been the best on the ground. So we've seen Aspinall on the ground offensively, but we haven't seen what Aspinall's takedown defense looks like. Haven't seen what he's like off his back. And so that's another unanswered question, because we know, even though Marcin Tybura is quite weak off his back, if he's able to get Aspinall down and get on top of Aspinall, we know that Tybura does have a pretty heavy top game. And what's really important about this aspect of the fight is obviously if Tybura can force Aspinall to grapple, if he can get Aspinall down, if he can get on top of Aspinall, and Aspinall's gas tank isn't on point, then that might accelerate the rate at which Aspinall slows. So as we watch this fight against Stuart Austin from 8 years ago, obviously Aspinall is going to be a lot better in 2023 than he is here in this fight, but we've got to keep a very open mind, because if we think about where Aspinall trains, you see him give up a very cheap single leg takedown there. If we think about where Aspinall trains, Team Culibao, it isn't easy for fighters that train in the north of England to develop good takedown defense and a good ground game, right? You just don't have the quality of training partners up there. You just don't have the coaches. Ultimately, iron sharpens iron, and it's very, very difficult to become a high-level grappler training in a part of the world where you just don't have the level of training partners and coaches to improve, improve and learn from. And if you think about other fighters that train in the north of England, where Team Culibao is based, where Tom Aspinall trains, think about the most notable guys from northern England at the moment. You've got Darren Till, that is Aspinall's training partner, that also trains at Team Culibao. What's Darren Till's biggest weakness? takedown offense, ground game is a joke. So when we're talking about iron sharpening iron, not only is Darren Till a lot smaller than Aspinall, so he doesn't make for the best training partner, but on top of that, you know, if Darren Till's takedown offense and ground game is bad, it does reflect a little bit on the trainers and coaches at Team Cowbon, and then you've got to really question what kind of training Aspinall has done to develop, you know, a decent MMA grappling skill set. And again, here his offensive wrestling looks great, just like his submission game has looked good in his quick wins in the UFC. But I'm more interested in the defensive side of his game. What does his takedown offense look like? What does his ground game look like if Tybura can put him in a bad position on the ground? What does his cardio look like if he's forced to grapple hard? And if you look at other fighters in the north of England, right? Paddy Pimblett and Molly McCann. You know, Chris Fishgold. I'm just thinking of, like, you know, fighters in the UFC from the north of England, not necessarily fighters from the north of England in general, but just ones in the UFC in recent times. I know Chris Fishgold's been released now. Obviously, these three guys, you know, these three fighters don't train at Team Cowbon, but they do train in the north of England. And again, what do they all have in common? Well, Molly McCann's takedown offense and ground game is a joke. We saw what Erin Blanchfield did to her. Chris Fishgold, very, very bad on the ground as well. Paddy Pimblett, also pretty bad on the ground, right? We saw, you know, him struggle on the ground in most of his recent fights. And so I just think that there's enough uncertainty over Tom Aspinall to the extent that I think it's very early to judge the level that he's at. I don't feel he's really proven a whole lot yet. And this isn't a criticism of him, because I'm British and I want to see everyone do well in life, right? I would love Tom Aspinall to outclass Marcin Tybura this weekend in a 25-minute war of attrition and answer all the questions I've been asking in this video. I love Tom Aspinall. He seems like a great guy, a really humble guy. I want to see him do well. But obviously, it's my job to assess risk-reward and try to find value in betting fights. And the way that I do that is by studying fighters in a lot of depth and drowning out all the noise, all the hype, all the media, and I just focus on what is true. And the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game is in the fight footage. And when you look at the fight footage of Aspinall, I'm very unconvinced, because what I see in Aspinall is a fighter who is very athletic, very fast, very, very dangerous early. But my question is, how does he look in rounds 2 and 3 and 4 and 5? Because 25 minutes is a really long time, and you can see him here looking very, very weak off his back, very, very sloppy. I was skipping to round 2 because I just wanted to see how tired he looks in this second round, and I'm pretty much done with this breakdown. I think I made my point. I think if Aspinall is able to perform for 5 rounds like he can for 1 round, I think Tybura is in a lot of trouble. Because of how bad Tybura is defensively, Aspinall will probably smoke him. But, like I say, guys with Aspinall's style of fighting in the heavyweight division are very rare. And it's because big guys like Aspinall don't tend to be able to move like Aspinall moves for very long without gassing bad. I hope Aspinall is a unicorn, but I like to work in most likely outcomes, and the most likely outcome is that he isn't, because if moving like Aspinall was easy to do, the whole heavyweight division would be full of guys that move like Aspinall. It's a great style of fighting. I just feel it's not that practical for a heavyweight to move like Aspinall does. I hope, though, that he turns out to be a beast, and you know, I'll very much look forward to betting him in future fights, because if his cardio is decent, he's going to be a nightmare, and I do think he could be a potential future champion, especially with him being so young at 30 years old. So, just want to, this fight's almost done, just playing this out so you can kind of see, you know, how weak he is off his back, how tired he is. I mean, look, Stuart Austin's got him down in the second round relatively easily, controlled him from top position relatively easily. I could absolutely see Marcin Tybura obtaining this position on Tom Aspinall, and we really have no idea how he will deal with being put in a position like this, because he hasn't been put in a position like this in a fight for 8 years. So it's a tricky one. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I being too harsh? You know, do you think Aspinall's going to win this easily? If you think that, let me know why. You know, are you even more harsh with Aspinall than I am, right? Do you definitely think he is all hype? Have you seen things that I've missed that you feel proves that Aspinall, you know, is going to start to struggle as he inevitably faces a higher level of opponent that will take him into rounds 2 and 3 and 4, which Tybura might not, to be fair. Like I said, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Aspinall knocked him out quickly, but we'll soon find out. So we'll let this play out. Just my point being, Aspinall looks awful here, but the fight was 8 years ago. Still got the energy here for this ground and pound, mind. Still moving relatively well as Austin turtles up. Austin rolls to his back now. But I think what happens with Aspinall here is in his inexperience, he kind of adrenaline dumps going for the finish here. You can see his hand speed starting to slow, and because of that, he just adrenaline dumps, and Austin just catches him with the leg lock. Strange finish to the fight, but anyway, I just wanted you to watch that because some fighters go their whole career without improving their ground game. They're just weak off their back forever. And I wouldn't assume Aspinall doesn't fall into that category, because he trains at Team Culibao, which, I mean, if you look at Darren Till, his ground game never really improved. You can't really include Mike Grundy because he was a Commonwealth wrestler before going to Team Culibao and transitioning into MMA, so he doesn't count. So yeah, man, I think the jury is out on Aspinall. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? Well, if you really want to bet this fight this weekend, from my perspective, there's no way you could touch Aspinall at these odds. You'd have to be crazy to bet on him. But Tybura is going to be in a lot of trouble early on because Aspinall will give him hell, you know, when they're both fresh. I don't personally feel there's a particularly strong position to put your money in this fight. I won't be betting it. But obviously, if you really want to bet it, it's dog or pass. You've got to go Marcin Tybura. Didn't pronounce his name correctly there. Apologies. So, in terms of the over-under on this one, because of how dangerous Aspinall is early and how bad Tybura is, or you know, how bad defensively Tybura is early, I could definitely see a quick finish here. Unfortunately, the odds on the fight to end inside the distance are terrible. The odds on the under 1.5 rounds is also terrible. So I won't be betting the over on this one. Sorry, I won't be betting the under on this one because the odds are so bad. But if you really want to bet an over-under on this just to watch it, you know, make watching it more interesting, I'll probably go for over 1.5 rounds. I don't feel particularly confident on it, but you know, maybe they start a little bit slow, feel each other out. Maybe Aspinall wants to pace himself so he doesn't come out the gate as fast. You know, 7.5 minutes in the right kind of fight with some clinch work and stuff could pass pretty quick. So that over 1.5 rounds probably gives you the best risk to reward ratio out of all the over-unders, but I won't personally be touching it myself because I think, you know, there's a good chance the fight will end very quickly. Obviously the most likely outcome is Aspinall to win by knockout or TKO, but the odds reflect that, and the odds are absolutely terrible on that for a prop. So yeah, I don't really like the props very much on this. They're not that interesting to me. If you wanted to be, if you wanted to play some Hail Mary bets for a little bit of fun, you might want to look at Tybura in round 4 or Tybura in round 5, 45.0, 66.0. Not that likely to win. But if Aspinall did turn out to be a bit of a glass cannon and fade hard, which is reasonably likely, then you may hit a big winner just by sprinkling a little bit of money on round 4 and 5 finishes for Tybura. But let me know what you think, man. Let me know what you think. Hope you found that useful. So now let's break down the co-main event between Julia Stoliarenko and Molly McCann. And if you really like that breakdown video for Marcin Tybura versus Tom Aspinall, please hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. It would help push this video to more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get into this co-main event. So Molly McCann versus Julia Stoliarenko is an interesting fight because Molly McCann is also, obviously a pretty big favourite in this one, which is always interesting to me when you have a fighter that has major weaknesses that is a big favourite, because when you look at the odds on Molly McCann, 1.44 minus 227 for an implied probability of 70%. What an implied probability of 70% means is that this fighter has no major weaknesses to worry about here, and she should win relatively easily. Now, while this is a good stylistic matchup for Molly McCann, we do know that she is at an extremely low level on the ground. Erin Blanchfield completely dominated her. I mean, took her down and toyed with her on the ground like she was a child. And while obviously Erin Blanchfield is a much higher level on the ground than Stoliarenko, Molly McCann is bad enough on the ground where anyone in the division with a semi-decent ground game is going to be able to cause her problems. And we saw Lara Fritzen, Taylor Santos, and of course Gillian Robertson also cause her problems on the ground. And while her offensive wrestling is definitely improving, defensively she isn't really. She is still incredibly weak off her back, and Blanchfield showed that. So this is one of those fights where even though McCann is a big favourite, and this is a good stylistic matchup for her, in order for me to bet fighters in this odds range, for me they have to have virtually no way to lose. Something crazy needs to happen in order for them to lose, or something improbable, needs to happen in order for them to lose. And I don't feel that would be the case here, because if you look at Stoliarenko's record, she is a bit of a one-trick pony on the ground. In that she loves an armbar, but she has caught girls in armbars, and it's one of those things, right, where it's like, it is like Grant Dawson, right, with his back takes. How incredible Grant Dawson is at back takes. Don't fear the man that has practiced 10,000 kicks. Fear the man that has practiced one kick 10,000 times. That's what they say. And obviously Stoliarenko is a bit of a one-trick pony with the armbar. But Molly McCann is at a low enough level on the ground that if Stoliarenko did catch her with a deep armbar attempt, I wouldn't have that much confidence in Molly McCann being able to defend it. So if we take a little look at the X factors, obviously Obviously, Molly McCann has got home advantage on her side. We've already spoken about the impact that has on a matchup like this. She's 33 years old, 5'4" with a 62-inch reach. Stoliarenko, 30 years old, 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. So both girls roughly about the same age, but you can see a big size and reach advantage for Stoliarenko. She will have a 7-inch reach advantage over Molly McCann. And even though she doesn't do a particularly good job of fighting long, we know statistically that having a 7-inch reach advantage gives Stoliarenko around about a 67% chance of winning. And so, straight away, when you look at the odds on this fight and Molly being a big favourite, we start to see enough risk factors which make it very difficult to bet her in this odds range. because we know she's a very low level on the ground. We can't rule out the possibility of Stoliarenko catching her in something crazy on the ground and submitting her. And also, Stoliarenko, with that reach advantage, it will be harder for McCann to get inside and land clean, hard shots. And also, perhaps perhaps her long arms enables her to generate more leverage on those armbar attempts, which is why she might be particularly dangerous with them. So if we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, there's no doubt that Molly McCann is going to have a very big advantage on the feet. Even though Stoliarenko has got a 7-inch reach advantage, Molly McCann's footwork, movement, and, her boxing is at a very good level. She's very good at getting in and out of her opponent's range, and Stoliarenko doesn't use her reach particularly well. So I don't think the reach advantage is going to have too much of an impact on this fight when it comes to striking. On the feet, I think Molly McCann absolutely smokes Stoliarenko. Stoliarenko is slow, doesn't really have much power in her hands. She's very bad defensively. I think Molly McCann absolutely styles on Stoliarenko on the feet. When it comes to grappling, I think both of them are reasonably even in terms of both of them being very, very bad. So what's interesting about these two is the grappling game, their overall MMA grappling package is quite similar in the sense that they're both pretty good offensive wrestlers. Molly McCann has actually got one of the best timed double leg takedown entries in the division. Her double leg takedown entry is absolutely brilliant. She's like Bailal Muhammad in that sense. She's just trained like a double leg takedown entry, like to a really high level. She's very good with it. And to be fair, Stoliarenko's double leg entries are very good as well. So both girls pretty good when it comes to offensive wrestling, but they're both awful defensively. So they both have very bad takedown defense. They're very, very weak off their back. And so this is one of those fights where it could be a situation where whoever strikes first, whoever hits that takedown first, is going to have the huge edge on the ground, because whoever's in top position in this fight is going to have a massive edge because of how weak their opponent is off their back. Having said that, we know that Stoliarenko, didn't mean to close that down, we know Stoliarenko is very nasty at hitting arm bars. What am I doing? Very nasty at hitting arm bars off her back. Got a bad case of sausage fingers there. So, yeah, it's one of those fights where both girls are deeply flawed. But what I would say about this fight is there's only one fighter here that has any kind of huge advantage over the other. That is Molly McCann. She is a significantly better striker. But I don't feel that justifies these odds, because these odds give her an implied probability of around 70%. And I feel, with how bad her ground game is, very dangerous to bet on her in that odds range. So what does all that mean, right? From a money line betting point of view, it's a tricky one for me, because with McCann having home advantage on her side, such a big advantage on the feet, and the fact Stoliarenko does like to stand and bang, to be fair, it's very, 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 very likely Molly McCann wins this. Her odds just don't get me excited. I don't think you're getting a particularly good risk to reward on the odds if you bet Molly McCann. But at the same time, I don't feel the odds are juicy enough on Stoliarenko to roll the dice and take a gamble, because she's going into a bear pit, right? The crowd are going to be right behind Molly. She's going to need to get the fight to the ground in order to win. She is primarily a striker, and I just feel you're putting your money in a lot of danger if you bet Stoliarenko. So I'm not sure if this is dog or pass. I will let you work that one out if you really want to bet this fight. Personally, I feel the smartest thing to do is to pass. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I do like over 1.5 rounds quite a bit. And I was surprised that the odds are this generous on the over 1.5 rounds. Yes, Molly McCann does come out the gate very hard, very aggressive. Her last 2 fights have ended under 1.5 rounds. But prior to that, she was a bit of a decisionator. This fight went over 1.5 rounds. So did all these fights. And if you look at Stoliarenko's record, she also frequently fights to a decision as well. And this fight almost went to a decision. So yes, again, her last 2 have ended under 1.5 rounds. But I feel some recency bias is having an influence on the odds here. Where if we look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of Molly McCann's, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of Molly McCann's last 9 have gone over 1.5 rounds. And 1, 2, 3, 4 of last Stoliarenko's last 6 have gone over 1.5 rounds. So this is where it comes back to, you know, my overall strategy for pre-fight betting just being to keep things tight and looking for situations where we can overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. This looks like one of those situations to me. So I will be betting over 1.5 rounds. I think that's a really good deal, win or lose. Because if you look at it, the implied probability on odds of 1.62, which is minus 161, is just 62%. Whereas we know that a much higher percentage of Molly and Stoliarenko's fights in recent history have gone over 7.5 minutes, 1.5 rounds. On top of that, another reason why I like the over in this fight is because both these girls are tough as nails. They're both absolute warriors. We've seen Stoliarenko take an absolute beating in fights. She can take a lot of damage and hang in there. She's even done that crazy Lethway shit, which is like Muay Thai with headbutting and that fucking crazy shit. So you know she's tough as nails. And we know Molly McCann very, very tough as well. Obviously, if the fight goes to the ground, Molly will be at risk of being submitted. But outside of that, I think there's a very good chance this goes over 1.5 rounds. Obviously, we've been doing really good on pre-fight betting this year. Pre-fight betting in 2023 has gone great for us. And so, as a result, I like that over-under. I think the money line betting on this card is kind of tough. But that over-under is very, very nice. So if we take a look at the prop bets on this fight now, we can see that, let's see if we got anything interesting here. Sorry, you probably hear my dog is going crazy in the background. Do apologise, very unprofessional. He will shut up in a second, I promise. If we take a look at the prop bets on this one, so I was hoping that the odds on Stoliarenko by submission would be better than they actually are. Obviously, the bookies, the betting public, are quite wise to the submission threat that Stoliarenko poses to McCann. So those odds aren't great. Outside of that, so I'm not going to be betting a prop on this fight apart from the over, which I absolutely love. I would go for McCann. If you're the type of person that wants to place a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, I would go for McCann to win by decision. The odds aren't great. I don't love it, but it's probably the most likely prop to hit because, like I say, both girls pretty fucking tough. They can both take a beating, and if this does turn out to be a stand-up fight, which I think is reasonably likely with both girls primarily being strikers, then yeah, McCann quite likely to win by decision. What we do know, based on home advantage, is it won't be easy for Stoliarenko to win a decision in London. We know that for damn sure. She's probably going to need to get it done inside the distance. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, hit the like button, man. It would really help push this video out to more people, which makes making these videos, you know, a lot more rewarding for me, a lot more worthwhile. That would mean a lot to me. And subscribe if you haven't already, as we now get into the next fight on this card, which is going to be Andre Touchy Fili against Nathaniel Wood. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Wood is the favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Andre Fili, he is around an average of 2.70. Call it, yeah, yeah, something like that, 2.67, which is going to be minus 167 for an implied probability of 37%. So Andre Fili is 33 years old, 5'11", with a 74-inch reach, and Nathaniel Wood, 29 years old, 5'6", with a 69-inch reach. So there are a couple of X factors on this one. First of all, being the size difference between these two. Nathaniel Wood is very small for a featherweight. He's got that small, compact, muscular frame with only a 69-inch reach. Fili will be a lot longer and a lot taller. He also knows how to use his reach. Fili has got a 5-inch reach advantage in this fight, and he really knows how to use it. He fights long, he has a long kicking game, a very, very nice jab, and he's very good defensively as well. Fili has got good footwork and movement. So this is a tricky stylistic matchup for Wood, because he will find it difficult to get inside and land clean and hard on Fili. Wood isn't the best defensively, not the best at working his way inside longer opponents, and I do think that the reach differential here potentially makes this a tricky fight for Wood on the feet. However, obviously we've spoken a lot about home advantage, separately, but this is one of the fights where I need to just add a little bit more home advantage context to this matchup, because I do feel this is one of those fights where home advantage is going to be particularly important, shall we say. Particularly important. Let me just check. Yeah, particularly important. And that's because I think this fight has got Fight of the Night written all over it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great fights at UFC London, but obviously Nathaniel Wood and Andre Fili are well known for putting on exciting fights. This is brilliant matchmaking between these two, and they're both pretty well matched. I don't think this is one of those matchups where either guy has got massive advantages over the other. I think this is going to be a barn burner. I think both guys are going to go toe-to-toe. I think it's going to be a stand-up fight, because both guys are pretty difficult to take down, pretty difficult to hold down. As a result, I see these guys just standing and banging. They both like to put on exciting fights. Neither guy likes to take a backward step. They both like to brawl. And because of that, it's going to be a very entertaining fight. Now, the problem with that for Andre Fili is that both these guys are absolutely tough as nails. They're both very tough, very durable. Both have great cardio. They're both very difficult to finish. They both also frequently fight to decisions. If we take a look at Wood's record, you can see he's an absolute decisionator. His last 4 have gone the distance. You take a look at Fili, and obviously a lot of his fights have gone to a decision as well. Look at this. 5 decisions in a row, 3 decisions in a row. You get the idea. A lot of decisions. Both these guys frequently go to a decision. So with how tough they are, even if this turns out to be an absolute war, which I think it will, very likely this one goes to a decision. It will not be easy for Andre Fili to win a decision in London against Nathaniel Wood, who will have the crowd behind him, who's actually from London, right? He's not just like from Molly McCann, who's from Liverpool fighting in London. Nathaniel is a true hometown guy. He's going to be one of the most popular fighters on the card, and he's also very exciting. He's also very entertaining. He also fights at a high pace. He's going to be trying to hit takedowns, throwing big combinations. Every time Nathaniel Wood has any success in this fight, the crowd are going to go wild. And that's going to work against Andre Fili, make it very, very difficult for him. So from a stylistic point of view, I really don't think much separates these two. They're both very difficult to take down and hold down. I know there was that fight that Fili had against Bryce Mitchell, where Mitchell was able to dominate him on the ground. But Wood doesn't have the same physicality as Bryce Mitchell. And obviously Fili trained for a long time at Team Alpha Male, so he's very good at working his way back up to his feet, usually when he's not facing an absolute monster like Mitchell on the ground. Wood at 5'6" with a 69-inch reach just doesn't have a particularly physically imposing ground game. So while both these guys might hit the odd takedown, they may get each other down, I don't think they're going to be able to hold each other down. And for that reason, I think this is likely to be a stand-up fight. In a stand-up fight, it's an interesting one, because I do think the reach will make life difficult for Wood. Fili's got a great jab, good footwork, good movement, devastating head kicks, and we know that Nathaniel Wood is very bad defensively. Neither of these are amazing defensively, partly because they love to scrap, they love to exchange, they love to stand in front of their opponent, and they don't mind taking a shot to give a shot. But Fili reads his opponents a lot better than Wood does. Wood has a habit of getting caught cold with a lot of big shots, and Fili's dangerous on the feet. So this is one of those weird fights where I think Fili's style of striking will cause Wood a lot of problems, but I know that it's not going to be easy for Fili to win a decision in England against Nathaniel Wood. So I'm very torn on this fight. My head says Fili. I can't say my heart says Wood, because it doesn't. I don't really care who wins. But all I would say is I don't think you're putting your money in a particularly strong position betting against someone like Nathaniel Wood in England. Let me know what you think, though. Let me know what you think. So, I do think this is a dog or pass fight. If you really, really, really want to bet this fight, I would take Andre Fili or nothing. But I think you're putting your money in a lot of danger. The whole reason why we have stats like the home advantage stat is to kind of keep us out of trouble and avoid losing money, you know, in positions where our money's not going to be in a particularly strong position, right? It's a strong stat to bet against. I wouldn't bet against it here. Wood probably gets the win, but all the value, in my opinion, is on Fili in this fight. I'm not going to be betting it. In terms of the over-under, we've already spoken about how both these guys frequently fight to a decision, and how this fight will most likely go to a decision because of how tough they both are. Unfortunately, the odds reflect that, with the odds on the fight to go to a decision being pretty steep. So that's not something that I'm going to be betting myself. But I do think it's quite likely the fight goes to a decision. Reason why I wouldn't bet it is ultimately because both guys are tough as nails, scrappy as hell, but they will go to war. They will go toe-to-toe. Neither guy takes a backward step. So even though they're both tough, they've both got good chins, they have also both been caught and rocked and wobbled and dropped in the past. So, you know, I wouldn't rule out a knockout in this fight. In terms of props, the only one that I would really consider terrible. So from a prop betting point of view, this one looks really dead. Again, if you want to gamble to make... See, that's the thing. I was going to say, if you want to gamble to make watching the fight more interesting, maybe go Fili by decision, but then the odds aren't that much better on Fili to win straight. So, yeah, man. Tricky fight for betting that one. But I hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, let's talk about the next fight between Andre Muniz and Paul Craig. Wow. We literally go from talking about super high level mixed martial arts, excellent matchmaking, you know, in the fight between Andre Fili and Nathaniel Wood, to just an absolute dumpster fire of a fight. To be fair, I do like the matchmaking in this one because both guys are very, very similar. But a bit of a dumpster fire of a fight compared to excellent matchups like Nathaniel Wood and Andre Fili. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about the fight, stop rabbiting on. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Andre Muniz is the favourite at average odds of around 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Paul Craig, he is around an average of, we'll call it 2.85, which is going to be plus 185 for an implied probability of 35%. So, Andre Muniz, 33 years old, 6'1" with a 78-inch reach, and Paul Craig, 35 years old, 6'3" with a 76-inch reach. So both guys virtually the same age, virtually the same size, and Paul Craig will obviously have home advantage on his side, even though he's Scottish. We know the British fans will be behind Paul Craig in a big way this weekend. And this fight, for me, is a bit of a minefield because of how many issues there are with both guys. Right from the offset, I will come out and I will say I do think Andre Muniz is significantly better than Paul Craig in every single aspect of MMA. I think he's got better MMA grappling. I think he's a better wrestler. I think he's got better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think he's got better striking. I think he's got better fight IQ, which isn't saying much because Muniz's fight IQ is particularly bad. But I do think Muniz is better than Paul Craig everywhere. However, like we say quite often in these videos, if making money betting on MMA was as simple as betting on the more skilled fighter, then everyone watching this would be millionaires, because it is very easy to determine who the more skilled fighter is in a mixed martial arts contest. I could train my fucking dog to do that. It is not a difficult thing to do, and he's really smart, don't get me wrong, but he also doesn't have hands, which would make navigating fight paths quite complex. But yes, Muniz is better than Paul Craig everywhere. There are issues, though. There are issues with this fight, and I don't even know where to begin. So, obviously, we know the impact that home advantage will have on matchups like this. Paul Craig's going to have the crowd behind him. That could rattle Muniz a little bit. That could demoralise him a little bit. That could lead him to adrenaline dump faster than usual. And, of course, I guess one edge that Craig does have in this fight is that I guess his cardio is better than Muniz's. Yes, Paul Craig does slow as fights wear on, but Andre Muniz has particularly bad cardio. If you go watch the Brendan Allen fight or the Antonio Araujo fight, you'll see that for yourself. Even the Uriah Hall fight that he won, actually, he gassed pretty bad in that, but Uriah Hall wasn't able to make him pay. So I would say Paul Craig has better cardio, and with a lively crowd at UFC London, perhaps that will accelerate the rate at which Andre Muniz will slow in this matchup. Stylistically, it is a tricky one. It is a tricky one, because my logical brain is like, Paul Craig is too sloppy, too bad defensively on the feet. Muniz is going to be able to just chip away at him, slowly outpoint him on the feet. And then my logical brain is like, Muniz is such a much better MMA grappler than Paul Craig that Muniz is just going to be able to double leg Craig, put Craig on his back and dominate him from top position. Because we all know Paul Craig is very, very weak off his back. The problem I have with this one is Muniz does get tired around about the midway point of a 3-round fight. He gets very, very tired. And when he gets tired, he goes to shit. He's a joke. Like, at the end of the day, Muniz was also a higher level than Brendan Allen on the ground. And yet, he was so tired that he just couldn't fight anymore. And so he was submitted by Brendan Allen late on. I wouldn't rule out that happening here with Paul Craig. Because if Paul Craig can survive round 1, which he most probably can, because Muniz isn't that dangerous unless you're a really, really, really low-level grappler, which, to be fair to Paul Craig, I mean, if there's one thing he could probably do semi-decently in mixed martial arts, it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's kind of why you need to survive against Muniz, because that's the only way he's going to threaten you. If Paul Craig can stay alive on the ground, which he does stand a reasonably good chance of doing with him having a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and if he can tire Muniz out a bit, drag him into the second half of this fight, I think Paul Craig does stand a pretty good chance of winning. Because if Craig can wear Muniz down to the point where he's too tired to defend himself, I do think Paul Craig can get a submission, but it won't be easy early on. The first half of this fight will be very difficult for Craig, because Muniz is significantly better everywhere. Craig is going to have to weather the early storm, tire Muniz out a little bit first, but he will have the crowd behind him, which will make him more likely Muniz adrenaline dumps, and that will energize and motivate Paul Craig. So, it's a tricky one, this. It is a tricky one, because I could see it going in two extremely different ways. I could also see my camera going blurry, which is really fucking annoying. Keep saying I'm going to buy new ones, but just haven't got around to it. I need to do it. It's on my list. Dana needs to give me a little bit of time to figure shit like that out instead of hitting us with back-to-back massive giant 15 fight cards every week. Anyway, back to this fight. I'm in two minds, because I can absolutely see a situation where Muniz is far too skilled for Craig and he just comes out the gate early, double legs Craig, just dominates him from top position for 3 rounds. I could absolutely see that happening. But I could also see a situation where Craig tires Muniz out a little bit with an active guard and finds a way to put Muniz in a bad position in the second half of the fight when Muniz is too tired to defend himself, and submit him. So, what does that mean from a moneyline betting point of view? Well, it means you've got to be fucking crazy to bet Andre Muniz. There's no way that I would bet Andre Muniz at these odds, at an implied probability of almost 70% against a British guy in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. No way. No way. Not a chance. Maybe if this fight was taking place in Rio de Janeiro and the shoe were on the other foot and Muniz had the crowd on his side and the judges on his side, maybe. It would still be a bad bet in my opinion at these odds, but maybe you could justify it. For me, this is dog or pass. the problem is, this is one of those fights where you'll either look like a genius or an idiot, right? There's people every day in the YouTube comments that love to make fun of me for betting on Irene Aldana to beat Amanda Nunes. They love it. But they're the kind of bets where you either look like a genius or an idiot. If you bet Paul Craig this weekend and Andre Muniz takes him down, double eggs him in round 1, dominates him for 3 rounds, people will make fun of you for betting Paul Craig. You will look like a fool because he got dominated. And people take a very oversimplified view of mixed martial arts. They don't really understand it on a deep level. They don't really think in terms of probabilities. On the flip side of that, if you bet Paul Craig this weekend and he weathers the early storm, drags Muniz in the second half of the fight, puts Muniz in a bad position where he's too tired to defend himself and gets a finish, then sir, you will look like a genius. You will look like a genius. Do you have the balls to pull the trigger and bet in that kind of situation? That is the question. Personally, I don't. Only because you guys know me by now. If we take a look at our pre-fight betting results from the year, I've been over this many times, right? If we look at our pre-fight betting results on the year, I like to bet underdogs. You know me, guys. I'm not shy when it comes to betting underdogs. We had a big winner on Jazz Duvicius here. We lost a bit on Aldana here. We hit a nice underdog there on Hooper. A nice underdog there on Belal Muhammad. We lost an underdog there on Cortez Acosta. What we got on page 2 anymore? We hit a nice big underdog winner on Pedro Munoz. And a nice underdog winner there on Lucas Alexander. So look, not only do I like to bet underdogs, but we win a decent amount of underdogs as well, despite morons coming in my YouTube comments every week and repeatedly bringing up losses on fighters like Aldana and completely ignoring the underdog winners that we win on, and we obviously win more on underdogs than we lose. But anyway, again, going off track, the point being, I'm not opposed to betting on underdogs, but the type of underdog bet that I like to place is where the underdog that I'm betting, in my opinion, has clear and obvious significant advantages over their opponent. So I probably shouldn't have closed that down before I go through it, but I'll quickly just breeze through it so you guys can understand the reason why I would perhaps bet someone like Aldana or Jazz Duvicius or Hooper or Muhammad, and I would not bet Paul Craig. If you look at Aldana, what advantage did she have? Well, she's an absolute cardio machine that can fight at a high pace. We know Amanda Nunes' biggest weakness is that if you make her work really hard, which Aldana didn't, which is why she lost, but if you make her work really hard, she will slow down a lot as fights progress. Juliana Pena showed that twice. Jazz Duvicius, obviously she's a strong grappler. Miranda Maverick, very bad on the ground. Hooper, good grappler, great cardio. Nick Hooper, not as good of a grappler as Hooper, a lot worse cardio than Hooper. Belal Muhammad, equally skilled to Gilbert Burns everywhere in my opinion, but an absolute cardio machine that can fight at a high pace. We know Burns slows as fights wear on. We know he can't keep up with the volume or the pace of Muhammad. Clear and obvious advantages. We could talk about Cortez Acosta. In fact, I said this in last week's video. I think Cortez Acosta was a bad bet in hindsight. Shouldn't have pulled the trigger on that. It is what it is. No one's perfect, right, boys? Anyway, into the next example, right? Munoz. Chris Gutierrez is awful on the ground. We know that Munoz was significantly better on the ground. If he could get the fight to the ground, he would likely win easily. There was a bit of grappling in round 1, but he also ended up outstriking Gutierrez as well, which was a cherry on top of the cake. In terms of Lucas Alexander, just better than Steven Peterson everywhere, pretty much. You know, no major weaknesses. This was a fight where Alexander was the underdog, and I didn't feel Peterson was better than him at anything. So, absolute no-brainer to bet Lucas Alexander there. So, the difference with those bets compared to Paul Craig Muniz is that I feel if I were to bet Paul Craig this weekend, it would be more of like a Waldo Cortez Acosta type bet, where the reason why I said that was a bad bet was because when I researched that fight, I was like, Marcos Rogerio de Lima slows down a lot as fights wear on. Waldo Cortez Acosta has much better cardio. He's a lot younger than Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who's in his late 30s and declining. And so if Waldo Cortez Acosta can take Marcos Rogerio de Lima into the second half of this fight, he stands a great chance of winning. That was like my logic for betting Waldo Cortez Acosta. Sound familiar? Exactly the same reason why I would be considering a bet on Paul Craig this weekend. Pretty much the exact same logic, right? Muniz slows down as fights wear on. If Craig can take the fight into the second half of the fight, he stands a great chance of winning. Exactly the same reason why I bet Waldo Cortez Acosta. The reason why I'm passing, though, is because similar to Waldo Cortez Acosta, even if Muniz does slow down in this fight, Paul Craig is still so bad from a technical point of view that Muniz may still be able to get the job done. So if you look at the Cortez Acosta De Lima fight, De Lima was absolutely gassed out of his mind in the second half of that fight. But because Cortez Acosta's takedown defense and ground game was so bad, De Lima was still able to take him down into the second and third rounds, kind of grind him out. I could see the same thing happen here to Paul Craig. You look at the Volkan Oezdemir fight, how weak he is off his back. Even an Andre Muniz that is completely gassed out of his mind may find a way to hit the odd takedown on Craig, lay and pray him, end rounds in dominant position, steal rounds with takedowns, and still get the win. It will be harder for him to do that in London, hometown crowd on his side. The ref will be more likely to stand them up because he'll feel pressure from the crowd. All that type of shit. Camera's gone blurry again. Not my fucking day-to-day, lads. But yeah, you know what I'm saying, boys. We wanna be betting on top tier fighters, overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour, getting our money into strong positions. Don't think Paul Craig's the one. And realistically, win or lose, I think the over 1.5 rounds on Stoliarenko versus McCann is a rock solid bet. If we sprinkle a couple of units on that, we make just over a unit profit. Why would we want to put that under immense risk, rolling the dice on someone as flaky as Paul Craig? It just ain't for me, boys. And yeah, as a result, I'm going to pass. But I do think it's dog or pass. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, we can see the over-under is set in coin flip territory in that even money odds range. Because of how bad both these guys are, I don't really have a strong opinion on it. Because on one hand, you could say they're both so bad that they're both just going to look sloppy and crap, and there'll just be loads of sloppy grappling exchanges where they're both kind of tired and giving up position, and just a really ugly, boring fight that goes 3 rounds to a decision. Or I could see either one of these guys getting caught in a bad position on the ground and submitted with something funky. Both are very dangerous on the ground, particularly early. So yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on the over-under. My lean is obviously fight ends inside the distance, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so there's not something you can bet. In terms of prop bets, you know what I would go for? You know what I would sprinkle a little bit of money on? I am not going to bet this myself because I do not like prop bets. I do feel like I need to always reiterate that. However, and I'm looking for the bet, the prop I would go for is Mr. Beardew to win in round 3, odds of 23.0 plus 2,200. Reason being, this ain't Mr. Craig's first rodeo. If you go way back in his career, he's partial to the odd 3rd round finish. Submitted Ankalaev in 3rd round, Kennedy and Chukwu in the 3rd round. It ain't over till it's over. If you look at Captain Muniz's record, he's also run into a few problems in the 3rd round in his last fight because of how badly he gasses. So if Muniz gets really tired in this fight, and maybe Craig's down 2 rounds heading into the 3rd and he needs a finish in order to win, the crowd's going crazy, he's got the crowd behind him, he hits a takedown on Muniz, gets into top position, I think Craig stands a good chance of getting a finish. So for that reason, Paul Craig to win in round 3. Do you know what? I don't like props. I might actually bet that. I might actually fucking bet that. I might bet it. How about that? That's how much I like it. I do think Muniz will struggle bad if this fight goes deep. And so Craig in round 3. Why not? You only live once, right, boys? So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Let's get this video out to more people and help me grow my channel. It would mean a lot. The channel doesn't grow much because obviously these videos don't get many views. So by hitting the like button, you really push it to more people. help me out. It would really appreciate it. If you get a lot of value out of these videos, obviously the bigger the channel gets, more incentive I've got to produce more content and you know, keep going over the years for longer, right? So win-win. Would really appreciate your help with that. Thank you very much. Now let's get into the next fight that I want to break down, which is going to be Fares Ziam versus Jay Herbert. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Fares Ziam is the favourite at average odds of around 1.65, which is going to be minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Jay Herbert, he is around an average of, say, 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So, also just need to check some football scores. Really sorry about this, guys. Let me just check some football scores. There's some football going on at the moment. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything too crazy. Nah, not really missing nothing. Just about to go into the second half, though. But yeah, these games look a little bit dead for betting, unfortunately. Alright, okay. Let's get into this next fight. So now let's break down the fight between Fares Ziam and Jay Herbert. So, Fares Ziam is the favourite at average odds of around 1.65, which is minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. And Jay Herbert is the underdog at average odds of around 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Ziam, 26 years old, 6'1", with a 75-inch reach. Jay Herbert, the Black Country Banger, 35 years old, 6'1", with a 77-inch reach. And for anyone that's wondering why he calls himself the Black Country Banger, is because he's from a place in the UK called Wolverhampton. And that part of the UK is just referred to in the UK as the Black Country. I've got no idea why. You could probably Google it and learn. But yeah, the Black Country Banger. So both guys are roughly the same size, but we can see that Fares Ziam is 9 years younger than Jay Herbert. And we know statistically that gives Ziam around a 70% chance of winning. So obviously Herbert, at 35 years old, is in the tail end of his career. He's not particularly old for a lightweight. He's not crazy old for a lightweight. I think it also helps that he hasn't been in the UFC that long, so he hasn't been in these wars against a really high level of opponent for too long. But obviously, unlikely he's going to be improving at 35 years old. Even if he's not declining, you would expect him to plateau. Whereas Fares Ziam at 26 years old should be making big improvements from fight to fight. So it is an interesting stylistic matchup, this one. And this is one of those fights that I haven't really made my mind up on yet. Because when I research this fight and I look at how both guys match up from a stylistic point of view, I don't really understand why Ziam is the favourite. So when you look at the odds on a fight, if a fight is the favourite, you would obviously expect to see like notable and obvious advantages that they have in fight footage, right? Like if you look at Aspinall, yes, the odds might be off. The odds may potentially be very off, right, depending on unanswered questions. But he's very dangerous early, dangerous on the feet. Tybura's bad defensively. I get it, whatever. You look at Molly McCann. It's likely to be a stand-up fight. She's a better striker. I get it, whatever. Nathaniel Wood, hometown advantage, gravy. Andre Muniz, better than Craig everywhere. Whether you agree with the odds or not, I kind of get it. With this fight, when I look at Fares Ziam's odds, I don't really see why he's a favourite. And for that reason, I am very tempted to bet Jay Herbert this weekend. Obviously, Herbert has got home advantage on his side as well. My problem with betting on Jay Herbert this weekend is when I bet a fighter, I want to be able to describe clear and obvious paths to victory that they have, where they have a big edge, right? And then win or lose, doesn't matter whether they win or lose, at least we know we've got our money into a strong position, a good risk to reward ratio, where we've placed a very good bet. And we can't win all the time, but most of the time, almost all the time, we can be sure we got our money into a strong position. My problem with betting someone like Jay Herbert this weekend is that if you put his odds into an implied probability calculator, they give you an implied probability of 44%, which isn't very far away from 50%. And I do think this is very close to a 50-50 fight. That obviously presents a little bit of value on Jay Herbert, but not much. And while I do think this is very close to a 50-50 fight based on past performances, we can't ignore the fact that Ziam is making big improvements from fight to fight, which does kind of make it difficult to cap this one accurately because we don't exactly know what version of him we're getting on Saturday night. We also know Jay Herbert is a little bit chinny, so even though Ziam isn't that dangerous on the feet, Herbert does tend to frequently get rocked, wobbled and dropped. And he's quite old as well. But does his home advantage offset those weaknesses? Or those issues, or those risk factors? I'm not sure. Generally, my approach to pre-fight betting, win or lose, is to overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour. I'll give you examples of that. So if we look at our recent pre-fight bets, right? We lost a bet on Moreno, but we knew, because of how tough Moreno is, it wasn't that likely Pantoja was going to be able to finish him early. And with how much Pantoja slows down in fights, it wasn't very likely Pantoja would be able to outwork Moreno, a tough Mexican, over a 25-minute decision. He did. Congratulations, Merry Christmas. Very happy for him. But it wasn't that likely to happen. Ismagulov, we know based on past performances, Dawson slows down a lot if you make him work hard for takedowns. We know Ismagulov is very difficult to take down, very difficult to hold down. Grant Dawson channeled his inner Damian Maia, looked absolutely phenomenal, dominated Ismagulov. We lost that bet. Again, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. It happened. But we put our money in a pretty strong position. Fakhretdinov, better grappler than Kevin Lee. Significantly better gas tank. We knew it was extremely unlikely Kevin Lee would be able to cause Fakhretdinov a problem. Fakhretdinov won easily. Randy Brown, significantly better than Wellington Turman everywhere, even though Turman showed up and looked significantly better than he had in his last few fights. Brown's advantages were big enough for him to get the job done. Irene Aldana fights at a high pace, cardio machine. Muniz slows down a lot as fights wear on. If Aldana could make her work hard, which she didn't, she stood a great chance of winning at big underdog odds. Jazz Duvicius, good offensive wrestler, massive advantage on the ground over Maverick. She dominated with her grappling. Hooper, better grappler than Nick Fury. Both guys are grapplers, so being a better grappler than the other grappler, pretty big deal. Also, Hooper, significantly better gas tank. We know Fury slows down as fights wear on. Hooper, really strong position for us to put our money. Tainara Lisboa, we identified in past performances that Lisboa was better than Jessica Rose Clark everywhere. Rose Clark also announced her retirement coming, or talked a lot about retirement around this fight. Again, even money odds range, very, very strong position. Baylor Muhammad fights at a much higher pace than Burns, much better cardio than Burns. We know Burns slows down in 3-round fights, let alone 5-round fights. Baylor Muhammad at slight dog odds, massively strong position for us to put our money. Cortez Acosta, bad bet, was not a strong position. So when I look at Jay Herbert, I just don't feel he fits the profile of a bet where we overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. Because even if the odds are slightly off on this one, they're not off by very much. Because when I look at how these two match up stylistically, I think they're very well matched. It's not like I can come here and say, Jay Herbert does this, this, and this better than Ziam. Whereas if you look at our recent pre-fight bets, if you look over our last 20 bets, I can go through every single one of these fighters and describe very specific things that they do better than their opponents, right? Even in the losses. You know, Pudilova had a big advantage over Jocelyn Edwards on the ground. A lot of people scored that fight for Pudilova. Mirzakhanov slows down a lot as fights wear on. Jacoby cardio machine fights at a high pace. If he made Mirzakhanov work early, like Aldana, he would likely win. He didn't make Mirzakhanov work early, just like Aldana, so he didn't win. And Preston Parsons, based on past performances, big advantage over Giles on the ground. So we can kind of talk about all the edges these fighters have. With Herbert, I can't do it. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, they both have issues on the ground. So neither of them are particularly good offensive wrestlers, and neither of them try to take their opponent down very often. They will occasionally try to take their opponent down in order to try and steal rounds, but generally speaking, both guys like to keep fights on the feet. Now, they're both very weak off their back. If you take either of them down, you can generally rack up a decent amount of top control. However, Herbert is far better at working his way back up to his feet than Ziam is. Herbert probably has a heavier top game as well. Ziam, probably due to his age, just isn't that physically imposing on the ground. Then, if we look at how these two match up from a stylistic point of view when it comes to striking, I would say that Ziam throws a higher volume of strikes. He's better defensively. But I would say Herbert lands the harder, more impactful strikes. But he does have a habit of getting dinged a lot. He's a little bit chinny. So this is one of those matchups where I would give Herbert a slight advantage on the feet, slight advantage on the ground, but nothing major. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be very competitive. To be fair, Herbert has home advantage as well. I might be talking myself into a bet on Herbert here. I just guess I haven't made my mind up on it yet. I'm very, very tempted by Herbert. I would have liked better odds on him, if I'm honest. But obviously, I'm not going to get them because, well, I doubt his odds are going to improve that much. Yeah, I guess I'm very tempted by Herbert. I haven't decided yet. I'll give it some thought. Help me out. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I missing anything? Do you favour Ziam? Do you favour Herbert? Let me know. Help me out with this one. I'm still making my mind up. If we take a look at the over-under, we can see that if we hit refresh, as we get the latest odds, where are we? So the over-under is in the even money odds range. This is a tricky one for me because even though Faris Ziam isn't that dangerous, doesn't really have knockout power, much more of a volume striker, Herbert is very chinny. He does get rocked, wobbled, dropped in most of his fights. Also, Herbert has big power in his hands. Now, even though Ziam, if you look at his record, has never been knocked out, there is a first time for everything, and Herbert does hit very hard. He obviously wobbled Ilia Topuria. He obviously wobbled Trinaldo as well in that fight. He's a very, very dangerous striker. He does have big power. So I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision, because if either of these guys were to get knocked out, it would be more likely to be Herbert because he's a lot worse defensively than Ziam. He's chinny. But because Ziam doesn't really have any power in his hands, it's not that likely Herbert would get knocked out. But you never know, man. Crazy atmosphere in London. It'll be wild. It'll be rowdy. Both guys might go toe-to-toe, get into some big exchanges. You never know. I won't be betting that myself. I'm going to stay away with it. But my lean is on the fight to go to a decision. If we take a look at the props on this one, Herbert by decision is what I would go for. I don't love the odds, so it's not something I would be betting myself. But if you really want a better prop on this one to make watching it more interesting, Herbert by decision is what I would go for. I hope you found that useful. Let me know in the comments, guys, because this fight is giving me a headache. Let me know what you think. Very tempted to bet Jay Herbert. Have you bet Herbert? Have you bet Faris Ziam? You might have. I do see a lot of odds movement with Ziam's odds declining from the even money odds range. And what's really interesting about this is that I would have agreed with these odds last week, where the odds are in the even money odds range. Then they moved, which don't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think the odds were accurate here. Now they're a bit off. Let me know what you think. Let me know. So now let's break down the final fight that I want to talk about on this card, which is going to be Josh Culibao against Lerone Murphy. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Murphy is the favourite at average odds of around 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. We take a look at the odds on Culibao. He is an average of around 2.20, which is going to be plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. So Culibao is 29 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach. Murphy, 31 years old, 5'9", with a 73.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, but of course Lerone Murphy has got home advantage on his side. What's interesting about this is that Lerone Murphy was a benefactor from a little bit of hometown cooking when he fought Gabriel Santos at the Edwards versus Usman event in London back in March. Let me show you what I mean. So if we go here to MMA decisions and we type in Mr. Lerone Murphy and we bring the decision from that fight up, haven't actually checked this, but I remember it being a really bad decision. We can see that virtually everyone in the MMA media scored this fight for Santos. I live bet Santos in this fight. I scored the fight 29-28 Santos. Thought it was a very, very easy fight to score. Thought Santos won this fight clear. But the judges disagreed. And Murphy was given a hometown decision. So that kind of highlights how big of a deal home advantage can be in MMA. And how difficult it will be for Josh Culibao to win a decision this weekend against an exciting, popular fighter like Lerone Murphy. And it's particularly important on a fight like this because both guys are primarily strikers and Culibao doesn't have a particularly judge-pleasing style. Culibao is one of these guys that is very much a volume striker. He likes to chip away at his opponents, but doesn't really land particularly hard, damaging, impactful shots. Kind of just likes to chip away at them, you know, rack up volume, rack up points. And because he doesn't do a particularly good job of putting his stamp on rounds, his fights are frequently pretty close. See, this one against Sungwoo Choi, ends in a split. This one against Charles Jourdain went to a split. This one against Jordan Cameron went to a split. And this one went to a majority decision. Obviously, split decisions, majority decisions usually indicate that rounds were close. And subjective as to how they could have been scored. So when you see a fighter like Culibao that is frequently involved in split decisions, it just says to me that he doesn't ever really just go out there and put it on his opponent. So if you look at how these two match up stylistically, both of them are strikers. Both of them very rarely try to take their opponent down, so this is very likely to be a stand-up fight. And like I say, Culibao's got that volume, you know, decent kickboxing, decent boxing, but no real power in his hands. He just looks to chip away at his opponents. Whereas Lerone Murphy, powerful, explosive, athletic. He doesn't throw with the same volume as Culibao, but he does land harder, more impactful shots that are more likely to grab the judge's attention, get a big reaction from the crowd. So this is one of those fights where I just feel, similar to Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Fili, it's going to be difficult for Josh Culibao to win a decision in London against a popular English fighter like Lerone Murphy. So for that reason, it's very, very difficult to bet against Lerone Murphy this weekend. Even though, again, like Nathaniel Wood, you know, like Nathaniel Wood, Andre Fili, like the J. Herbert versus Ziam fight, I don't think Murphy's got any massive advantages in this matchup, because I do think Culibao will be able to hold his own on the feet and probably outpoint Murphy with more volume. Culibao is also the better grappler out of the two. So, you know, looking at the odds, I'm not going to be betting this fight. But if you really, really want to bet the fight, take Murphy at average odds of like 1.68, which is going to be minus 147 for an implied probability of 60%. If we take a look at the over-under on this one, where are we? Where are the odds? Sorry, guys. You're all staring at it. I know you are, and I'm still searching. There we go. Okay, so the over-under on this one, I do think it's more likely to go to a decision. Both guys are very, very tough. You can see on Culibao's record, 3 of his last 4 have gone to a decision. Murphy's dangerous, don't get me wrong, but Culibao is tough. We've seen him in there with some heavy hitters, taking a lot of damage, managed to hang in there. So I think this fight's more likely to go to a decision. In terms of prop bets, we don't actually have the full range of props posted, do we? Or do we? We do. Okay. I think Murphy by decision is the only prop that would interest me, but the odds are absolutely terrible. So I would give that a miss. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. I hope you found all the breakdown videos useful. I hope you crush it this weekend and make loads of money. And yeah, man, hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Love you all. Take care, everyone. See you all next week. Nice one, guys. Bye.